Go.
Okay, welcome. We'll call to order the meeting for May 17, 2023, the meeting of the Project Review Board, and minutes will reflect that we have a quorum. And Caroline, you want to update us on staff approvals?
Sure. So before I update you on that, I just want to let you know that I just received a request to table the item for L.O. Bean at 95 Main Street for the design review certificate and site plan review. So that will be tabled from tonight's agenda.
The minutes will reflect that it's my 43rd wedding anniversary, and my wife is glad that the third agenda item is tabled.
Congratulations.
Okay, that will be noted by Sharon. So I don't have any staff approvals to share with you. Two things I do have for you. We had two last month, our two requests for temporary activity permits. Because the request for the temporary activity extends beyond 3 weeks before the code officer can issue it, the project review board just has to note their concurrence with that being issued, that they don't have any objections. So the first temporary activity permit is for the chamber. They want to do the car show across the street like they did last year. It will be all summer, once a week on the property owned by Linda Bean. And the second one would allow the town to put up kind of a platform. It's kind of actually repurposing of a parklet platform from last year in Memorial Park, so different community groups can use it to have concerts in Memorial Park between now through the end of October. So if there's no objections with those two temporary activity permits from the board, the code officer will be reviewing them tomorrow and is prepared to issue them.
Does anyone have any questions or objections?
I just have a question. Were there any, I know when we had meetings in here last year, we could hear the noise. Was there any noise complaints last year?
We didn't get noise complaints. Meeting House Arts did a couple concerts in the park last year, and we hadn't gotten noise complaints down there.
And from the auto show?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see both activities, if they're doing any more this year.
Okay.
To get complaints or not. The planning board this month had their meeting was to have a workshop with the housing committee, and the housing committee's been looking at land use ordinances in Freeport and ways to increase housing opportunities in town, looking at things like accessory dwelling units, revisiting density, locations, some other ways that we can encourage housing. So they just really had a open conversation in a workshop format about housing, the situation of housing in Freeport, some things the committee was considering, and some things that the planning board's working on. Planning board's going to be really deep diving into the new state legislation referred to as LD 2003, which is an act to create additional housing units in Freeport, which we talked about last month. So many of you will probably be getting notices on the mail, and we invite you to participate in those conversations and hearings in your own capacity. The Downtown Vision Implementation Task Force, did we have a?
It was. I wasn't able to attend.
There was a meeting. We really just talked about budget and kind of continuing the charters in the budget process, which the council's deeply involved in at this point. So I think after, probably June, after the June meeting, when the budget's adopted, we'll have some more information to report on some of those charter items that came out of the vision implementation. And then finally, Monday, the town of Freeport, in association with GP-COG and the Freeport Sustainability Advisory Board, hosted a workshop regarding climate action planning in Freeport. As you know, we're working on the preparation of a climate action plan. I don't know if anyone was able to attend. We had about 50 people at the meeting. There's a website, www.freeportclimateaction.org. You can go on there. There'll be eventually a recording of the meeting that Tom's working on. There's some workshop materials that you can go and review. There's a survey, and when anyone leaves here tonight, there's actually a hands-on mapping activity in the hallway where they're looking for feedback of areas of concerns in Freeport where, there's some concerns for things like flooding or different environmental impacts. There'll be a second part of the meeting, the workshop series, in the fall. If you want additional information, visit the website or reach out. We do now have a sustainability coordinator shared between Freeport and Yarmouth. Her name is Meddy Smith. She works in the planning department, and if you have questions or want to follow up, you can reach out to her. That's everything I have for you.
Great, thanks. Everyone's received the draft minutes for the March 15 and the April 19 meetings. Are there any Questions or additions? There being none, is there a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
A second.
All in favor?
You're doing both, or one at a time?
On both.
Oh. So what do we do when we're at one?
Oh, I don't
I'm
think,
sorry, did you have?
No, for all here.
yeah, they weren't all here. I think you need to
Okay,
do them
you were here for-
separately.
Okay, we'll do the minutes for April 19.
Good point.
We'll do March 15 first. All in favor of accepting March 15 minutes as presented?
Aye.
Can you clarify who moved and seconded that for Sharon?
Lynn
I
moved.
I second it. I'll say
Todd
so.
seconded, and it was 1, 2, 3, 5 A's, 0 nays, and Jason recused.
No, yay on that one.
Oh, you were on Zoom, sorry, okay.
All in favor of accepting April 19 draft minutes as presented?
Mr. Chairman, before we vote, forgive me, mind if I ask a question for clarification? That is, at our last meeting, I had requested an edit. I just wanted, I think it was left as going to a check and come back to, and I was unable to kind of decipher whether or not that's been, what the outcome of that was.
Changes were not made to it because I thought you guys were going to look at it and bring them up at this meeting if you
We're
had,
going to revisit that?
if you had changes that you wanted to make.
All right.
This is for April 19.
Excuse me, this is for.
The ones you just
It's the one-
voted on.
The ones that are already voted on. So that's over and done.
Okay.
So we can move on to April,
Okay.
which is a lot simpler.
Okay. All in favor of accepting the April 19 minutes of the Project Review Board as presented?
Could I just have a comment? I have a comment on your April minutes, even though I was not at the meeting, but when I read the minutes, it just seems strange to me, under the Gritty McDuff section, it seemed like it was discussed, moved, voted on, and then there was additional discussion after it was all done. So I just didn't understand that not that it would have been typed wrong, but it was just unusual to me to have further discussion after the.
I agree with you. I read that last night, and the motion, I think there's a lot of deliberation, and you guys added the conditions, but the entire motion with the added conditions appears in the minutes before the discussion.
Yeah.
So clearly, if you weren't at the meeting, it causes some confusion.
Okay.
I think you could,
Is that, legitimate to then continue doing, after you've already moved on, to go back and then continue talking and potentially have changes without making a new motion and a new?
We did. We did do that.
Oh, you did, okay.
so,
What page is that on, Linda? Since you've-
It
looks like
starts on
you've got-
page 8, the start of the
Thank you.
discussion.
page 11 is where you have the motion. So I think if you wanted to make it read, I think you could put the moved and seconded with 1 and 2 at the top of page 11, and then it will be weird if you break up the motion, but I think you could either add condition 3 and 4 on page 13, or just have the motion entirety duplicate on that page if you wanted. So the whole thing as amended shows after the discussion.
Or just move the line about the vote to after the discussion.
I mean, the important thing is that the whole motion's there and it shows what you approved, which it does. It's just, I think the placement, that was a little bit confusing because it was a confusing conversation.
So if we just move the one line of the roll call vote to the end of the discussion on page 13.
Is that what happened?
This is what happened.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
We had
Yeah,
discussion after the motion was made and seconded.
But, right, but then you added 3 and 4.
After you already had your motion.
The motion has shown that includes items 3 and 4.
Yeah.
Items 3 and 4 were the result of the discussion.
So I would think that the minute should record that the motion, either that you had a second or an addition to the motion at the end when it happened, or not do it that way. I don't know, it just, it's odd.
How about if we do this? How about if we take the whole moved and seconded through the roll call vote and put that at the end of the discussion? Because there was probably a move and seconded, and that those were rescinded, and then the whole thing was removed and seconded.
Okay, I mean, that would read better, if not be better.
Sharon, did you get that?
I got it.
Okay.
It was awkward.
So moving the whole motion to page 13, right before, after the motion passed.
That's correct.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
so then,
Is there a motion to accept the minutes revised as just discussed?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, you guys went, okay, great.
Can we,
So how do you
Abstain.
vote in for this?
so there were 1, 2, 3, 4.
Abstain,
Oh.
and I guess we both abstained.
Thank you.
First agenda item is Davis Properties. This is before us because it is a Class B historic building, which means it was built prior to 1930 in the Design District Number 1, and you're making a material change. I think the materiality is limited to the extension of the retaining wall.
Respectfully, Chair, my name's Jonathan Davis. I'm the owner of Davis Properties LLC that owns 209 Main Street, map 12, lot 56. I think there are actually three components. I'd love to say that you're right and this should sail right through, but there are changes maybe of different degrees of materiality. One is a change in the material. The existing wall, as the exhibits show, is a relatively aged concrete wall that's in the process of deteriorating, but it's probably 8 or 10-foot concrete sections that are capped. So first we have a change in the material, where we're proposing using the vineyard blend retaining wall blocks that are indicated in the materials that we submitted. The second change would be, again, the extension of that wall, which right now ends just at the stop sign on Kendall Lane, at the Kendall Lane Main Street intersection. So it goes down Main Street to Kendall Lane, and then about 12 and a half feet to the stop sign on Kendall Lane, shown on some of the sketches that we've provided. Again, as the chair noted, we're requesting permission to extend that wall approximately 46 to 50 feet down Kendall Lane to the Kendall Lane driveway onto the premises shown on map 12, lot 56. So again, the extension part. The third component of our request is that the existing wall is shown on the exhibits. At its vertical height, true original vertical height was probably 24 inches tall. And with the lean, it's now it's leaning towards Main Street. It's now approximately 22 inches tall. We'd like to raise that from its original height by about a foot to have a 36-inch height extending in from the driveway on Main Street, down Main Street approximately 50 or so feet, and then down Kendall Lane 50 or so feet. So material change, height change, and extension are the three requests that we're making. The exhibits, especially towards the end of the materials, show in yellow the location of the existing wall and show in pink the proposed extension. And then some of the exhibits prior thereto show the materials options that we've been provided by the various contractors we've engaged to provide us with estimates. And our preference is to go with the vineyard blend, so-called, that gives more of a mixed stone appearance, almost a multicolored granite-ish. I don't want to oversell it, but a multicolored granite-ish appearance, as opposed to what they refer to as the quarry blend, which is a much more uniform color, almost a charcoal gray, and it struck us as being almost too homogeneous, whereas we can, if you squint, perhaps the vineyard blend looks more like speckled granite as opposed to just a charcoal gray wall going around. So that's the basis of our request.
Any questions from the board?
Your exhibit on the vineyard blend, is that for color and look of the stone only, you aren't adding towers.
Correct, correct. Just color and look of the stone, because again, understanding the importance of maintaining the appearance of the village overlay district, we wanted to make sure that the board was aware of the color scheme that we're seeking, but certainly we're not intending on doing any towers or anything like that. It's going to be a uniform height.
Right.
Any other questions from the board?
I have one question. I just want to confirm that I understand correctly that along Route 1, there's no extension. The extension is on Kennel Road off Route 1.
That's correct. If it will assist the board, if you take a look at what's been tabbed as exhibit, or marked as Exhibit O, that should be an overhead view of a Google Earth image. And the orientation, of course, is that the right-hand side, the majority of the yellow is the existing wall, and you can see that the vast majority of the existing wall is on the Main Street sideline. And then we see the bend that it's getting about 12 and a half feet from Main Street down Kendall Lane towards the middle school. That's the existing wall there in yellow. And the extension, not to scale, but the extension is shown in the pink. And it's also referenced on the exhibit before then. Exhibit N shows the DOT survey of the location of the existing wall in yellow when the Main Street Kendall Lane intersection had some work done on it. And again, you see the pink showing the proposed extension.
How does that placement of the wall affect, or does it affect the placement of the stop sign at that corner?
It should not, candidly. If you take a look at Exhibit N, and I'll focus in particular on the enlargement of Exhibit N, the zoomed-in view, the stop sign is actually at the outside edge of the wall by approximately, you could drop a soda can down there between the wall and the stop sign. So the stop sign is not in the wall. The stop sign is on the road side of the wall, and there's a gap between the two of 6 or 8 inches. So my anticipation is that the contractors will work around the stop sign. Of course, we'll have to coordinate with road commissioner in the highway department regarding the work, and if they would like us to pluck it up and then plant it back, we'll certainly be happy to do that. But we're not intending on any way interfering with the location and placement of the existing stop sign. And if there is any interference, it'll obviously be replaced in that exact same location.
It looks like the course of the wall would run straight through where this sign is at if the wall is turning down Kendall Lane.
Chair, may I approach the bench to give a better illustration?
I think one thing that might clarify is the stop sign should be in the right of way. The wall's going to be on private property. The applicant is actually having that survey located, or sorry, that line located by a surveyor to ensure that this wall is going to be entirely on his property.
Well, and we won't quibble, and thank you for the clarification. Those of us that own the property think it's very interesting to have the DOT survey showing a prescriptive easement, in essence, squatters' rights for highway purposes for what is in essence lawn. So that's an interesting question. That being said, DOT is not making any claim to own the wall. We wish they would, because we'd like them to fix it and do it for us. The wall is ours, and we're going to be repairing the wall that is ours. And in terms of the extension, again, the wall moves along this way, and as you read the legal description, you'll actually see that I wish Kendall Lane was a straight shot, but there's a bit of a curvature. When you look at the legal description, it's our exhibit B as in Bravo, and you look along the Kendall Lane side, you'll see that it's not a straight line. There are a couple of angles. So as I'm out there as a layperson, not a surveyor, if I'm standing at the stop sign, I wish I had a straight shot down the edge of the lawn and down the edge of the sidewalk. I don't think I do. I think I actually angle on my long side a little bit, and I think I'm going to lose more lawn than I'd like to, but I don't own the lawn, I don't own the lawn.
You're not going to do this work until after your survey, is that right?
Correct. Correct. And the survey work is being done by Mid-Coast Survey, a Freeport surveyor, surveying officer by Brian Johnson. He's actually been out there doing the field work. But I am not going to be encroaching at all into the right-of-way.
Any other questions from the board?
Just one question about Exhibit D.
Use and dog, yep.
It's a little grainy, but as far as I can tell, there's sidewalk that runs along the wall.
Indeed. So the sidewalk runs all the way down Main Street. If we start at the intersection of Mallet Drive, we're on the library side of Main Street, heading south. The sidewalk extends all the way down, wraps around the 209 Main Street, map 12, lot 56, and continues down to the middle school. And I think you might see a better view of that for clarification purposes. If you take a look again at the zoomed-in section of Exhibit N as in Nancy, for lack of a better way to put it, you'll see that right in front of the yellow that indicates the existing 1 feet wide concrete wall, you'll see PVD period SW, paved sidewalk. And that paved sidewalk does in fact wrap all the way around.
So does the wall or the work associated with the wall end up touching the sidewalk?
No, there's actually grass at all points between the side, if not grass, dirt, at various ranges. It ranges from, let's take a look at one other one. The distance ranges from approximately 3 or 4 feet to 6 or 8 inches. But there's, at all times, at no point does the wall and sidewalk connect.
Okay. So whatever work the contractors are doing that disturbs that grass will be replaced in kind.
Correct. And the Exhibit D is in Delta. Is that the grainy one you were looking at?
Correct.
Yeah, so with Exhibit D is in Delta, you'll see that there's a green space between the wall and the sidewalk at all stretches. If you take a look at the steps coming out of the front of the building, the concrete steps, the existing concrete steps, there's at least 2 steps that are on the dirt between the wall and the sidewalk. So the concrete steps go, here's the edge of the wall. Go that way. The steps go down, and the sidewalk is here.
Right.
That was artful depiction, by the way. Expect that to be noted in the motion.
Any other questions? Any questions or comments from the public? Is there a motion?
I'll do it. Be it ordered that the Freeport Project Review Board approve the printed findings of fact and design review certificate for Davis Properties LLC for alterations to an existing wall on the property at 209 Main Street, Tax Assessor Map 12, Lot 56, to be built substantially as proposed, application dated 5/01/2023, finding that it meets the standards of Freeport Design Review Ordinance with the following conditions of approval. 1, this approval incorporates by reference all supporting plans that amend the previously approved plans submitted by the applicant and their representatives at Project Review Board meetings and hearings on the subject application to the extent that they are not in conflict with other stated conditions.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Before, can we?
Oh, sorry, your discussion?
But I would propose supplementing the standing motion with one additional condition, that it is subject to survey control.
Okay. Is that,
Number 2, this approval is subject to survey control.
Can you clarify what you mean by that?
It's subject to confirmation of location on the applicant's property as determined by a professional land surveyor.
As relates to the stop sign?
As it relates to the location of where the wall is being placed.
Are you expecting that they're going to submit something for that, or just that they're going to just survey it and do it?
Just that they're going to survey
Okay.
and do it.
okay, is there any discussion about the proposed amendment?
Just a clarification. Do they still need do they need to get a building permit for this? No.
No, and we don't typically get surveys either. That's why I just asked the question to clarify.
Okay.
I mean, if he did
So they don't need to
encroach,
go to the codes enforcement,
He could check, but my understanding is we don't, for outside of the shoreline zone, he wouldn't need a permit.
Okay. Okay.
Should we record the survey?
Excuse me?
Should we record the survey?
We don't typically require that as a town or a board.
Saying as an alternative to submitting anything.
He'll be out of compliance with the approval if he.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, I agree. I'm just floating alternate ways to do
I
it.
think if you wanted documentation, we require him to submit a copy, and then we put it in his record file
I
here.
think that's fair. That approach is
Yep,
fair.
because if we're going to enforce it, that's a much easier way for us to
Yeah, yeah.
deal with it.
So,
approach fair.
so it would say approval subject to survey submitted to the planning office, or the,
Yep.
okay.
Is there a second?
I'll second it. Oh, or did you already?
Planning department.
Seconding the amendment. Is all in favor of the motion as amended?
Aye.
That's approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Second item is Farrell and Elwell. Tim Forrester.
Before I give you background on this, I just want to, for people that showed up later, people on Zoom, that the third item for LOB has been tabled. Maybe everyone's here for a shoreline zoning permit, but we usually don't have a crowd for that one.
I hope not.
Before Tim starts, I got a question. Because I often pull up Google Maps and use that as a reference point to help me. Is that,
I think if you're going to pull it up during a meeting, it'd be best to share it on the screen. I'd be happy to teach you how to do that. Or I can pull it up for you.
okay,
It'd be good that everyone has all the same information.
correct. Okay, that's why I asked.
It was very helpful. I was going through my minutes saying, how do I get, why don't I have that?
Yeah, I agree. The image, the map image was more helpful than some of the materials that were submitted.
And I
Maybe what-
frequently use it during meetings, and it is helpful to be able to do that personally, because I'm able to move around and look at what I'm interested in looking at. And I know that it's not a matter of record, but it is a reference point that's publicly available.
Yeah, let me see if there's a way we can like incorporate it in the staff report. They don't print and reproduce great, like I do what you do. Like if you print them, they're like, eh. Yeah, or we could start pulling them up at the beginning of items in the meeting. It's something we easily have the capability to do.
It also might be appropriate to just reference on the record that that the review of these public images were part of what was considered.
Okay.
Well, and as someone who's relatively new, it's really helpful for me to know where it is.
Exactly. And that's usually how I start with,
Exactly.
what am I looking at? And what's my reference point? Yep.
Okay, second agenda item.
Sorry, Tim.
No,
That's okay. Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Tim Forrest with Atlantic Environmental, here on behalf of Christine Farrell and Robert Elwell at 33 Cuttingham Road in Freeport. The applicants have owned the property for over 10 years, and there was some existing riprap along the shoreline, and they had also added a small wooden landing with a small ramp to provide them access to a gravelly shore in order to carry their kayaks down to get down on their little beach. But the elevation of that wall was very low, and behind it, if you look, there's a Google image background on the survey plan that we provided. There's lawn area in behind there, and it frequently overtopped because it wasn't built high enough. And then there's been additional erosion along the sort of eastern side of the property that wasn't previously stabilized. So what we would like to do is remove the rock that's there. It's somewhat, it wasn't built the way that it should be built, in my opinion. Typically, you're burying your toe stones to at least half their size so that they can't be undercut, and it should be large, irregular riprap, 2, 3, maybe even as big as 4 feet in size. So we'd like to take out what's there, replace it with something better, and then raise the elevation a little bit. On the uphill side of that, we would backfill it, and then it's currently lawn, but we are going to add shrubs and additional vegetation to create a vegetated buffer in behind that wall. And then the last piece is to put that little seasonal walkway back in place. We're actually going to move it further up into the head of the cove so that it lands on the gravelled area as opposed to landing on a salt marsh area. So it'll have less of an impact on the resource. The project goes before DEP, the Army Corps of Engineers. We also went to Coastal Waters because of the walkway down to the resource. We do have an Army Corps permit. DEP is still short-staffed and on the fence to issue the permit for this, but Coastal Waters approved it as well. So that's the short and sweet.
One additional thing to note I meant to mention at the front is we have had conversations with DEP. I'd say there's some hesitation to possibly shifting these to the purview of the staff review board, but they are open to coming during daytime hours and doing some board training for shoreland zoning and applicability as it pertains to your duties.
So I won't have to come here anymore?
You would still have to come, but they're going to know all your lingo when you come in.
Oh, great.
Would that give us the rights to say yes or no then? Or do we have to defer to?
You would have to follow the same, you'd have to follow the same shoreland zoning rules. The permit he's talking about from DEP is not a shoreland zoning permit. It's a Natural Resources Protection Act permit, which is a different division of DEP with their own rules and different things that they do. Some overlap.
I have a question then?
Yeah.
On the application. Is there a need to have equipment, trucks, heavy materials go down to this area? And is that on this, it says proposed construction access.
Correct.
That goes down
Yep.
to the shore. Is that already gravelled or whatever it needs to be to hold all the equipment coming
Yep.
in?
So it's for the most part, you come off of the driveway, and then it's lawn down through that almost entire area. And then this particular Google image doesn't show it all that well, but it really is a lot of lawn area right in behind the wall. So all equipment access and equipment will be in the upland during construction.
Thank you.
Is there any tree cutting that's part of this design?
No, there is not.
Any other questions from the board? Any questions or comments from the public? You're looking online, Caroline?
I'm not. Would you like to see something?
I wasn't asking if you were shopping. Is anyone, do you have anyone from the public?
Do you want me to show you what I'm buying?
The public who's zooming in
No.
on this?
No, there was not.
Okay.
No, sorry.
All right. Okay.
Wait, I can shop during the meeting?
Back to,
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion.
You just beat me.
And we don't need to read this, right? Because everyone's here, correct?
Just do this, right?
I propose, be it ordered that the Freeport Project Review Board approve shoreline zoning permit for Christine Farrell and Robert Elwell for a shoreline stabilization project as written in red.
Any discussion?
Sounds good. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you very much.
I didn't let you do your introductory comments on that, Caroline. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
She was shopping.
Shopping.
We'll just focus on expediency.
You had, do you want to talk about the rules of procedure?
I didn't put anything in the packet, but actually we did research it and we did find what Jim was talking about for Biddeford and the way that they do things in a different, non-traditional order, that it seemed like it was something that the board was open to pursuing, where the public asks their questions before the board does. If that's something the board wants to pursue, it's not how our attorneys explained it before that we should or could do it, but if someone else is doing it, I'm happy to ask the question to see if we can make it work for Freeport, if that was the intent of the board.
Can you review what was the question put forward that you asked about? I
Yeah,
know-
do
I
you
think I
want
read it
to
in
summarize
the-
the process that you liked there?
So I think the issue that we were looking at, the layout of the structure of meetings in which there's public comment, in which the applicant presents their, their materials, any direct, a butter or someone that's, has an opposition position would be able to present the materials, followed by public comment on whatever that they would like to comment on, then followed by the board being able to ask questions of any of these categories of discussion, in hopes that, one, can demonstrate that we're hearing everyone before reaching any kind of conclusions, and two, hopefully increasing the efficiency of not having multiple waves of questioning. We can just get it all done.
What do you mean by multiple ways?
Meaning, if we all take a turn at questioning the applicant, and then we all take a turn, and then we let the public comment, and then there's new questions that arise after the public comment, then we're potentially going back to the applicant for clarification about those questions. By changing that sequence, we can just do it all in one fell swoop.
Although I would say you don't want to limit the fact that we might go back to the applicant.
Oh, no, I don't think it limits that at all, but what it does is it certainly what I've experienced is often there's two bites of the apple, because we start with questions, and there's almost always some secondary questions after the public comment happens.
Is this just only for public hearings, or is this for anything you're
I
talking?
mean, I think I would propose it as a means of receiving information for anything in which the public is here to communicate with us on.
But I think, in my experience, albeit not in Maine, but out of the state, public input, public times when they're allowed to speak because it's a public hearing, there are specific rules that have to be followed, where in this, the way the board works, we're asking the public if they have any comments, and that's somewhat, in my background, that's somewhat unusual, that in many places, the public was not allowed to speak unless it was considered a public hearing. So this, I just feel like there may be two sets of rules that maybe if we're going to do this, we might want to separate things, because public hearings have, I assume they have to have a certain set of rules that have to be followed as far as allowing the public to speak, and maybe not how many times, but at least if everyone wants to speak. And then I know particularly that last time, there were people that wanted to come back up and make additional comments. From a legal standpoint, I would like to know if those are appropriate to let them come back again, and then we would have to allow that to happen again. So I
can
guess I'm
limit
looking,
comment.
what?
We can limit whether someone speaks more than once and how long they can speak. We have to do it for the whole meeting, obviously for the whole matter.
And in essence, what we're doing, I mean, these are the rules, these procedural rules are the rules that govern, that would govern public comment. And so we have the ability to create those rules.
I'm going to say, I learned through the questions, and I inform myself through the way that we're doing it now. And I know it may be a little frustrating for that, but I think that it serves us well, and I don't think that we necessarily are going to benefit from much more time savings by just having one bite at the apple, if you will. And I do like being able to ask the applicant up front, listening to comment, and then have the opportunity for questions again. That's helpful for me.
I'm wondering, for the edification of people who are coming, to hear us speak or ask questions first, we may be able to answer some of those questions just by virtue of our going back to the applicants on their behalf. And it could cut down the public hearing time, but by virtue of the fact that we've addressed their question as a board. I think there's something about there getting a sense of how we have studied it, how we're looking at it, how we approach it based on our rules and regs. In other words, we can't talk about certain things because it's not within our purview, even though people out there are concerned about the pink house. It's not our issue. So there's something about our taking our responsibility to explain how we're coming at this first, and then people responding. I mean, that's how it's working now. I see your point about not doing it twice, but.
So, I disagree with you about that. Based on watching the hearings that we've had recently, I think what this demonstrates is that the people that are taking time out of their day to come and communicate their opinions about issues, they're not here to hear our opinions on the issues. They're here to express themselves, be heard, and I think what we've seen is that they express there's a sense of frustration of how long do I have to sit here before it can be my opportunity to just say my piece of what I'm here for. And I think it's a lot to ask if we're going to push that public comment to the very end of the proceeding. That also means that they're sitting here trying to say their piece, but actually waiting for us to do so first.
On the screen, here's a nice short snapshot, condensed from Biddeford, how their rules work for the sequence and time allotted. They do staff report, applicant presentation, then they open the public comment or public hearing, input or questions from state or local government bodies, input questions from abutters or other interested parties, and then public rebuttal testimony at the chairperson's discretion. They close the comment hearing, and then staff, applicant, the planning board response, and then the planning board deliberates. Again, this is different from ours. We haven't gone through it with the town attorney.
One way I'd read that is C, that's an opportunity for us to ask questions as the board.
I don't read it that way, but you could.
I mean, it's stated two different, it's stated,
Yeah.
state and local government
So if we
bodies,
use this
which
language,
we
we
are,
probably
and then it
wouldn't
also
cover
says
it.
more specifically down at the bottom.
Yeah, I think F is where we would, on that chart, I think, I read that to say F is where we would plug in.
And I think, going back to Lynn's point, I think that, I was watching one of the town council meetings, and they follow, a very different, they follow a process similar to this, I guess, at least for that meeting. And I was very curious, and I was happy to hear that they opened it up for the board, the council, to voice an opinion or ask questions. And that, to me, was helpful in me trying to frame my questions, going back to Lynn's point. And then, as a public person, okay, and not as a sitting up here. And then sitting up here, it's also helpful for me to hear what people's comments are, then to go back and reframe my thinking as well. And we went through that a couple times. I went through that a couple times.
Can I ask you a question? Just do you perceive there's a distinction between questions on the spot for clarification of something that was just said or heard versus walking through a substantive issue that you've identified in your review?
From me up here, sitting up here?
When you're expressing the desire to be able to get questions off closer to real time, is that for everything on your mind or limited to the things of clarification.
I'm not sure.
Based on the group here tonight.
Can I give you some input? It's really, actually, I found that it's very helpful. So, I'm Peter Enzolini, I live in South Freeport. The last time I was here, there was a whole bunch of people, and there was a lot of arguments, and so I wanted to come back and see normal process, right? So one of the things that your discussion is really kind of interesting. The difficult part for us on this side of the podium is that when somebody makes points about what they're trying to do, and we're sitting here and we either agree or disagree to that point, the most frustrating thing for us is for us to be able to come up here and say something that we're really passionate about, and then all of a sudden the board, and this goes to the town council also, right? The board makes a different statement or a different decision that kind of takes what people have said and kind of says, oh, it's really not worth the comment, right? And you don't say that intentionally, right? But how you come back and make a statement potentially will negate the person's statement that they're trying to make. So I think it's helpful for us that's sitting over here saying, okay, we heard the proposal. We'd like to get an initial view from you all, because we might be addressing that proposal, but we're also addressing you as trying to convince you that our point is valid, right? So we're having a conversation about, yeah, I like this, well, I don't like this, and I hear somebody saying, yeah, but it's valuable, it's good because of this, this, and this. I'm sitting here saying, okay, so that means I'm really opposed to it. I want to convince whoever's making those statements, so I'm going to try to sell you that. If you don't allow that, what's going to happen is people are going to try to get up 2 or 3 times to refute what the statement was to make their point. So that's how I see the interaction, and I see it at the council, and I see it at primarily most meetings, right? Because we're coming up here and we're trying to convince you that either this is good or bad, and I don't know how you fit, what your opinion is. So until you give me your opinion, I can't include you in my rationale or not include you.
Thanks.
So that's how I would see it.
The way you are, your preference is the way our rules are written.
Right.
Presently, and I'll just say, I like them the way they're written, because lots of times, when we're having a public hearing, we're dealing with an applicant who's already been before us, so it's a continuing discussion. I've always been comfortable getting our questions out early on updates and stuff like that.
You guys are different than the council because you're quasi judicial, so they function a little differently, but when they have a formal public hearing, like the manager will kind of introduce the item, they'll open and close the public hearing, taking their comment. Then sometimes if staff's there to present, we'll present after the public hearing. Sometimes we'll present before, but they deliberate after the public comment. Sometimes sitting there on the other side, like I find it helpful to hear what you're going to talk about or what you're going to say, because that does spark more questions. So I think depends on the situation and the topic and the different people in the room, what's going to work better for Lynn might not work better for me. At the end of the day, I think it's just really important that we have a clear process that we can work on when we don't have controversial items in front of us, and we can get this policy circulated. So when people do want to come in, even if they don't like them, at least they know what the steps are.
I have one on the, are we done with that one? I didn't want.
No.
We're
I
not.
have a question. One thing that I feel when there's a public hearing on an application, what I always thought was said, and once again, maybe I'm thinking of my old commissions, the the people from the audience are not supposed to be addressing the applicants, they're supposed to be addressing us. And if we get people making all their questions, so the applicant goes first in a public hearing, I assume, and then the people from the audience have their questions that they're asking. Everybody should be addressing us. And it seemed to me a benefit to allow all of that to happen. I'm a big note person, I take notes. So then there's a list of things that I know we as a board then can ask or answer and maybe ask for clarification. And it seems that's a process in a public hearing that has a method from start to finish of the public hearing. And it seems clean because we're getting all the questions and then we're doing the answering or the re-questioning. And then it's over when it's over. I mean, it just seems like there's got to be a start and finish to the process.
I think you're technically correct. I mean, the way it's written, questions come through the chair from everyone on the board first, then when we get around to the public, comes public through the chair to the applicant. That's the way this is written. You know, we tend to be informal, but we had another one like we did on.
And I don't think, you mentioned public hearing, okay? And I think that we have an informal public hearing just by nature,
A
the chair.
public questioning
That's
is what you
correct.
have.
Okay, yes, public
Yeah.
questioning. Okay,
That's what I asked
It's not a
earlier.
formal hearing.
Right.
Okay, but we follow the same sort of process, I think, in general, right?
But I think
mean, We just
legally-
we don't technically open it as a public hearing. We ask
Right.
for input.
On every agenda item.
Yeah,
like
so-
we
But
just
that's
did.
our
Thank you for
method.
coming out tonight, by the way.
That's your policy. The real difference, so really the only time you hold a formal public hearing
Is when you
is
have to.
subdivision and design review on large applications. You hold them. Otherwise, your practice is to take public comment. When you do a public hearing, there's a formal public hearing, you're right, you open and close it, and then you put an ad in the newspaper. Otherwise, you guys function to always take public comment, which I will say, when we brought our new town attorney on, they found very interesting, because a lot of towns only take public comment when they have a hearing, but it's in your rules and it's been your practice. It can lead to large meetings and a robust public
Instead of blowing
process,
up on
which
us,
is
though,
good.
I like
Well,
doing
I'm not someone who says, but this is how we've always done it. However, there must be a reason so many towns do it this way. Whether trial and error over the ages, or Robert's rules, whatever the source, there's a reason it goes in that order, because it's worked. And
I still think there's got to be a distinction between public hearings and allowing public comment.
Well, so the distinction in my mind is that if we're having a large design review, a site plan review application or a subdivision application, we follow the rules rigidly. On the other stuff, we're just winging it. We just say, does anyone have anything to say? And I don't see any harm in doing that.
No, I think it's fine for us to get some other opinion if there's there, and it gets the audience, the other side of the table, to also be able to let it out, and it gets the applicant a chance to hear basically all sides if there happen to be other sides. So I think it's fairness, and I think that comes across better, but I do think the public hearing stuff, we really need to do it in a way that has an order and, it doesn't get crazy after all.
So it sounds like a majority consensus. Jason hasn't really said anything, is to kind of keep it as it is.
Yeah, I was initially intrigued by the idea of having this sort of more forward information gathering process that would, help inform us from what we see on paper and what we hear from the applicant and what the buzz of the room is. And so in a linear manner, that made some sense, and then we're chewing on it. But then your comment was interesting about how there's more of a dance going on between us being up here, folks being out in the chairs and coming up to the podium, and more reading people's attitudes towards or disposition toward the subject. Adds an interesting sort of social drama to it, which I think is what obviously part of our process and has been, but is intriguing in that sense. And so I guess I'm more inclined to keep that in place, to let it play out in a way that I guess adds a level of, responsiveness. But I guess the other curious thing about the whole public comment or hearing is that we hear from the public, and on some level we absorb that internally and we discuss it amongst ourselves. But it's not like we're trying to hammer out a consensus between someone who's saying absolutely not on one side and someone who's saying absolutely yes on the other side. We're really like finding a path through the way the ordinances and standards are written for what the outcome is. So I know that for some people, like family members of mine, they find that process to be lacking, I guess, in terms of the fact that you could get up there, say what you have to say, and then there's more or less no discussion about it after that.
I think it's hard too, like, you guys have a job and you have a very thick book and you have an application, and sitting up here, you know the standards you have to stick to. So, if someone comes up and comments on, like affordable housing, that's a good example. A lot of people love to regulate that. We don't have a standard, and so you guys know if those comments are made, it's not something you can go into, but the person making the comment doesn't always understand that. And I just use that because it's an easy example, but there's all sorts of things, especially when something you feel like is deeply impacting your day-to-day life, that you'd like the board to be able to regulate, but you guys know you can't. So it's hard, but it does sound like cause some public,
Well, just on that, I think it's also
Understanding.
helpful too, in that it's an opportunity for someone to get something in the public record.
Yep.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Yeah, it can flag things, I think, too, for like, hey, we keep hearing about affordable housing, we should like tell somebody about that, that's the other thing. So there's always value in hearing the comments, even if it's not something you can do anything about today, it doesn't mean something you can't do in the future. So as far as that rules of order document, knowing that we had an item table tonight, I had another applicant on US Route 1 North that was almost ready to come back. I have a couple other people that might come back next month. So I think in June you could have a pretty full agenda potentially. So the intent was, a while back, we had some legal work done on the rules of order, and there were quite a bit of changes. We had some stuff that the board had talked about in the past, so I think my intent was to mark up a version and bring it back to you guys for consideration. If you have a packed agenda next month, then I won't do that. I'll focus on what you need to get through. You guys have also raised some questions tonight, so you all got an email today with an agenda for the 24th. We're going to come, and it's just a workshop, so we'll sit down there, and we'll just kind of review the ordinances and go through and just ask, generic ordinance questions, look at the setup, kind of go through some of the standards, and kind of just dig into how we're doing the findings for the different kinds of things that you do. But I think a good follow-up to that could be another legal workshop with the town attorney. So as we ask some of these questions, or if we want to get clarification on like, okay, we're going to try this, but, we might want to revisit our process, be keeping a mental list, because if we have enough stuff, I'd be happy to bring the town attorney in
Could
for
we also
separate.
perhaps open it up to coastal waters too?
The
Because,
town attorney?
well, for some of these discussions or workshops, because the coastal waters is both judicial and legislative.
Yeah, I wouldn't open they can always come to any meeting. The next workshop's really just going to focus on your 3 ordinances that
Okay.
they could definitely come to legal workshop if we do it. At the last one, I was like, oh, we should have had them come, they could have benefited, but I think we'll see what your questions are.
Okay.
And if
Okay.
you don't have that many questions, I feel like we could do a
Okay.
joint workshop.
But just going back, because I think I'm not sure we closed the discussion about our procedures. One thing that I'd like to just throw out there, and I don't know if this makes it into the document itself, the rules, but if someone is thinking they'd like to make an amendment or change something, it would be helpful, I think, if that was done up front before someone makes the motion, so then we have to make an amendment. If it's important to throw that out there for discussion purposes, so that when a motion is made, we can just make that motion with that good idea in place, and just to save time.
I'd encourage that person to sign up to make the motion.
It doesn't hurt to do that, because you know what the printed motion is. Okay, great.
Yeah, just to second that, I think you did a good job tonight, but I think if we have everybody in the room, best practice is we fully read the motion. It's your motion, so you can tweak it, but we're having issues making motions on the fly that we're leaving out conditions, not adopted, the printing findings, things you guys need to legally be doing. So you can tweak this, but there's certain things we want to make sure that you're checking off, which is incorporated into this printed motion. If we have people on Zoom, especially applicants and board members, the reason that we've been reading the full motion is because they can't just walk into the room and grab a staff report and see what's there. So if you're saying, with people on Zoom as printed,
So
they
you're
don't have
suggesting that
it.
we read it every time, whether we're all here or not?
That would be a best practice. I mean, if you're all in the room, I think you can get away with how you did it tonight. And you worded it great because you covered everything. But definitely if we have applicants or people on Zoom, I think it's really important that you're reading so they understand somewhat what you guys are approving.
Is there a way for the proposed motions in the body of the text to be like red or bolded or somehow distinct from the rest of the
Yeah.
text to make it easier
Yeah,
to like
sure.
sift through the paper and
Find it.
Yep.
Great. Anything else? It is the last thing on our agenda, right, Caroline?
So
Hold on, I'm shopping.
when we come next week,
Yeah.
should we be bringing all of our books and everything?
Thank you. I would say two things. If you want a digital version, all the ordinances online are up to date right now. I can email you the links to all those. If you want printed version, my guess is nobody has an updated zoning ordinance printed because we just updated it last week. So if you want a printed copy of that, if you want to let me know now, I'll have my assistant get those ready for you.
3-hole punch.
I'd like
It's a 3-hole punch.
I'd like us all to be thinking about going paperless. Boards that, in my experience, this is the only place that still does paper. And
This board?
This board is the only
Board.
organization I'm involved in that is not digitized. And we're going to have to do it sooner or later. I'd like to do it first. I'd like us to think about doing it sooner, but maybe discuss it at the next meeting, but be thinking about it. We would be the first board, according to Caroline, we'd be the first board in town to do it. But I know it's a lot of work and a lot of paper to prepare it and then to do it again digitally, right?
You're talking besides print, I mean, if Carolyn gets everything in PDF format or whatever online, if there is a request such as I would give, then I like to have certain things on paper. It's how I work. Too old to change my life right now. But I also don't easily have the computer that I can work on here. So it would be hard for me. So if it's going to be a requirement, that's going to be one thing. If it's a recommendation, I think that's great.
Yeah, the day will come that it will be a requirement, I predict, but I think let's just talk about it at the next meeting, but I think if we can be moving that way as much as possible, it's.
I mean, I don't mind having things sent and they're on my computer at home. I will print out whatever I'm interested in printing, other than the big plans and things. But, I mean, I think that if that's how it goes, that's how it goes. And if I'm going to bring in all my sheets, I don't want to be shunned,
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, especially where we always have revisions. So like if they just revise pages, like usually I'm like, we're not going to collate those. You have to come in and do it. But if they're not here, it's so easy to say, get like a PDF, but are you going to have the consultant drive from Boston with one page? So we do have to maintain for public record and retention 2 identical copies right now. We are trying to go all digital. You'll notice we got rid of a lot of file cabinets. That's because they're out getting scanned. So everything that comes into you right now, we're keeping 2 copies, but we won't forever. I will go on record that I also enjoy paper plans, Linda.
I'd like to.
I would like to make a suggestion, though, and I don't know who's doing this, but I request that my paperwork is left for me to pick up, because I think the cost to this commission, to the town, at least from our stuff, is really exorbitant. I mean, the mailing of all that stuff to whoever's still getting mailings is very expensive, because I've seen what some of them are. I would rather that we either pick it up or you keep it digital, if
It
that
is,
is a change.
although I'm not always physically here on Fridays, and a lot of the packets are going out on Fridays, so I can drive here a half an hour to drop your packet. But a lot of times, if they're not ready Thursday, they get put in the mail. Otherwise, you could wait till Monday and pick it up.
I mean, for me, Monday would be fine, but I don't know about anyone else. But I think it would be
Monday's fine
helpful.
for me, too.
Yeah, I mean, it is, like, every time I go to the post office.
Yeah.
And there's the
Okay.
whole delivery in general.
So try to transition to electronic if you can.
Well, I do,
Maybe,
I mean,
And then, but then also, rather than mailing, pick up.
I will say
Yeah, Linda
that
picks up any chance that she can. I think the
I
other.
always pick up, but unless, you don't have it ready, but
Yeah.
I just think it would help the town budget by a few $100.
The other thing I would suggest is that maybe if we know you're not going to be at a meeting, we don't give you a paper packet, you get a digital packet, if you guys are okay with that.
The only exception to the electronic files is, the full sheet plans, which are really helpful. So far, I mean, if we could receive these kind of documents in native format, then the digital is excellent. But currently, we usually just get scans of these, which are pretty low quality.
Well, scans and physical copies are not, the scale is not exactly accurate if you were to start measuring things for yourself. They're not exact.
Well, this is not going to happen overnight, but
Let's start tonight. So does anyone other than Ford want to make a commitment on the spot to go fully digital packet?
I'll do that. I'll do it.
Todd and Jason, all right, there we go. Halfway there.
and if others can live with picking up their file on Mondays, it would avoid.
Yeah, that's actually a huge help in a cost savings. Lynn, does Monday work for you to pick up, or would you rather get it mailed?
No, well, I'll tell you about my next problem. Next meeting. Yes, Monday's normally fine.
Okay, yeah, perfect.
Is there an option to come in here and look at the physical copies?
Always,
Okay.
yes. Yep, there's always copies here. I think like ideally, so I foresee us making additional ordinance amendments in the fall to site plan and subdivision. We have money to have someone from the outside come look and help us just further streamline our process. And so I think if some of us are trying to go digital and it's working, awesome. If it's not working, then that's fine too, but we could, our ordinance regulates all the copies, so they have to bring us a stack. If you have something controversial, even though I know you guys are all gonna get digital, I'm still gonna require it by the book. So I think as we work towards transitioning, or at least some of us transitioning that way, that might be something we wanna revisit eventually, but we always have them here. The other thing we always physically have here is full-size drawings, so you get the reduced size set. We also get a 24 by 36, which is the standard set if you want to come in, look at, scale stuff off. That's here for the public and the
And
board.
the applicants are doing all of the scanning and all the converting to PDFs, or are you doing that in the past?
No, for the most part, I mean, if somebody comes in and they don't have a computer and they don't have a scanner, we're gonna run it through the
Okay,
scanner. But
the big sets, that's stuff that you're,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that they're doing.
yeah, for the most
Okay.
part, we do
Okay.
very little, like if they do a sheet, we might print that, but no, we do very little of it.
I was going to, my recollection is that Portland will not accept paper. I think they insist on everything being digital. but-
Yeah, code enforcement, like they're all digital. They don't keep any paper now. Here,
Okay,
they get
well,
it, but they give it back.
My only
Repeat this
problem is
for us.
if I'm if I'm away, it depends on where I am, as to whether my computer can deliver it on an island. I had trouble, that's why I picked up my packet today. I
Right.
just came down this morning. And I could not get all of the LL Bean stuff on my iPad up there.
And it's so much, I mean, to me, it's much easier to be able to move around on paper than scroll, and then I have to go backwards, and I'm just, as they say, I'm
Yeah,
an
that-
old-fashioned person. and-
Well, we can all.
You do make a good
We can
point,
hear.
Lynn. We had that today. We were trying to save some files, and Nick's computer could not handle opening one of your packets because it was just so big without like the full-size drawing. So if you don't have great internet or Wi-Fi.
Another costs and paper saving thing, when we have such as, we had to do, we got the March 15th minutes in this packet, paper. Last month, You got the same packet, and maybe if there's a way of saying, previously sent or something, so it's referenced that you already got it 1 month, don't throw it away, because the next month, we're going to have to go over it, and then you don't have to do 45 pages or 25 double-sided.
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of having it electronically, because it's.
No, yeah.
All right, is there anything else?
I will not be at the June meeting. I will be away. Just letting everyone know that, so whatever comes up then.
Lynn, you'll be.
I'll be Zooming.
Zoom.
I cannot Zoom
And
in.
assuming I can get, well, I'm going to plan to have it picked up on Friday, maybe? Can Billy pick it up?
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Quick clarification, for our workshop next week, we talked about having a session that will include spending some time talking about the broader policy issues. Is that, that's contemplated as part of what we're workshopping next week, or only?
What we would, for example?
For example, we discussed talking, like before meeting with the council, spending some time together just to kind of review. general
Yeah, I
policy.
advertised it just as a focus on the ordinances next week. Maybe we could put if you want to get into policies that we can't tie to that, we could put it on the June agenda.
Okay, I just remember that we punted our opportunity to talk to the council about these issues with hopes that we could actually get together and kind of have some kind of.
You have a little time because they're in budget through the end of June, so.
I just want to kind of keep that on the.
Please do, yeah. Okay, so
Should we keep this for the next time that Bean comes?
yes,
or-
please do keep that. If they decide that they're changing their plans for whatever reason and resubmit, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So, second?
Happy anniversary.
All in favor?
So you do
Good night,
have a plan to sign from the last meeting?
Thanks for
So-
coming.
Pens?
You guys added, no?
Black pens?
Okay,
No,
I just
because we
wrote
don't have
myself
to
a
do the
note.
fancy Mylar anymore.
So what do we, oh,
They're right there. The other thing they put on here is they turned back on the wetland layer because legally you have to have that. It wasn't something that changed, it was just our printing.
Sharon?
There.
Power back on yet?